And actually, most of the things, when you think about them, like what's difficult is the human element. And medicine is one thing, but what's difficult is human beings that you're treating. Are they going to listen? Are they not going to listen? What are they going to do? What are the factors that are involved? All of these kind of things. Management, of course, is management. It's very interesting. All right, Bismillah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد في الأولين وصل عليه في الآخرين وصل عليه يا ربنا في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. The second pillar, we're on commanding good and forbidding evil. I don't even remember the breakdown that we're going through here, but it had all of these subcategories. Remember, stages of guarding against infringements. And we covered that. Okay, and then we got to second pillar. So where was the first pillar? Where is the first pillar? Actually, let's just read it and inshallah it'll become clear. It says the second pillar, rahimahullah ta'ala, wa nafa'ana Allahu iyahu bi ulumi fid darain, ameen. The issue which is being prohibited should be a forbidden thing which is currently present and manifest. To be a forbidden thing means that its occurrence should be forbidden in the Sharia. A forbidden thing is more general than a sin, because whoever sees a small boy or a mad person drinking beer should throw the beer away and forbid him from doing that. Similarly, if a person sees a madman committing adultery with a mad woman, mad here meaning insane, or an animal, he must forbid him from that. Yes, you'll find very strange things in the Sharia, and not because, again, the difficulty is the human component. Human beings are human beings. The point is not to say, can you do this or not? The point is to say, you have, if you're saying he's saying you stop something that's evil is broader than stopping something that's a sin, because something could not be a sin for someone because they're not responsible. So if someone's insane and they I don't know. Let's take something that's a little bit more less crazy. I mean, it's crazy, but let's just say you find someone who's insane and they're beating an animal. Okay, they're just like make it even crazy. They're harming this animal for no reason. Obviously, that's something that under normal circumstances it would be sinful. You can't really do that. For this particular person, it's not sinful for them, but you should still stop them. That's what he's trying to say. Okay, so the issue is whether or not the thing is bad or evil is more essential than the question of whether or not it's sinful, because it could be that maybe the child is doing it. The child's underage, they're not technically responsible, but it's still bad and they should be stopped from doing it, is what he's saying. Uh, my statement currently present excludes a person who has drunk alcohol and finished doing so, and so on, because such an issue is not for individuals. Additionally, this statement excludes what will happen later, like if it is known from contextual evidence that a person intends to drink alcohol at night. In this case, no prohibition occurs except through admonishing the person. So the point is, if someone's stopping an evil, then the evil has to actually be happening, right? It can't be that you think it's going to happen, or that it happened in the past and now you're kind of, I don't know, doing, or you're investigating it or something like that. He's saying if you're an investigation of what happened in the past would be a matter of state. It's not a matter of the individual for them to have to do that. Well, because the question here is what is the responsibility of the individual? So the individual sees something that's harmful and they see it actually happening. Not that it's possibly going to happen in the future or that it happened in the past, and they then become responsible. My statement manifest excludes a person who commits a sin but shields himself in his house or closes the door to his house. So this is in Islamic studies, you always have these definitions, and each word in the definition has a particular intent and a particular meaning. It's there for a reason. It's not just thrown into the definition because they feel like throwing it in. So what he's doing is he gave this definition, he's explaining each piece. Why? Because if someone commits a sin in their house or they do something that's wrong in their house, but it's not exposed to everyone else, it's not the responsibility of the general public to do something about it. It was hidden, it was in their house, it's their business. Does it make it halal? Of course not. but it doesn't make it an issue of public responsibility. In this case, it is not permissible to spy on the person unless what they're doing inside of their house is reaching outside of their house. Okay, so he gives the example of music because we've already gone over that, but that's, we use his example of music that you're in, and of course, this is before there's recordings, and I mean, even recordings, you could argue the same thing in the sense, but you can hear the music from outside, and so you say, okay, you go and get involved somehow. Or, just use that as a case study for other possible cases. Um, this, however, I kind of feel like it's hard to explain, but this might get kind of situational also. Um, yeah, might get kind of situational also. Again, use the kind of principles and try to understand the way that they're thinking and use these approaches to considering situations as a guideline, but don't get lost in the trees, so to speak, right? Says likewise, if a smell of beer emanates from a certain place, the preponderant opinion is that people should go to the site and forbid them this sin. So they walk by and they smell something that's clearly a prohibition. Should they get involved or not? He's saying basically they should get involved. Again, considering that there's a lot of factors here, as we talked about before, So I don't want to necessarily always go back to what we talked about before, but at the same time, I don't want things to be misunderstood. Someone hears it out of context. So keep in mind that you're in his situation, you're in a Muslim majority place that's ruled by Sharia. So, it's a little bit different situation, perhaps. Um, of course, not to even get into the conversation of talking about non-Muslims. I mean, non-Muslims is a whole different issue. So this is kind of assuming that you're dealing with Muslims under a Muslim ruled context. So then you could theoretically get involved in that sense. For forbidding an evil deed, it is conditional that it should be known that the action is an evil deed without ijtihad. Thus, there is no prohibition for an issue which is subject to ijtihad. Ijtihad is the badlun wasi'. Then mu'ahad, you could say, like this is my own definition, not technical definition, but it's the exerting of a qualified individual all of their effort to come to what they believe is the correct ruling of the Sharia. That's ijtihad. So the great imams would do ijtihad. The point here being that a Hanafi should not criticize a Shafi'i for eating an animal which has been slaughtered without mentioning Allah's name. Similarly, a Shafi'i should not criticize a Hanafi uh, for doing certain things that would be allowed in the Hanafi school. The point is that if something's allowed in one school, it's not allowed in the other school. Just because it's not allowed in your school doesn't mean that you stop the other person, right? That's the point. It has to be an issue where there's no ijtihad. There's no valid difference of opinion. Okay, third pillar of stopping this evil concerns the one being prohibited. Everyone must be prohibited from committing evil, and it is not stipulated that he should be legally responsible, as I have previously explained, that small boys and mad people must be prevented from evil. So it's what we talked about. If it's harmful, it's harmful. If it's evil, it's evil. The fourth pillar concerns with guarding against infringements, and this has stages and etiquettes. Uh, so basically, the first one is that they they've actually seen it done. So basically, they're not spying on people, they're not eavesdropping on people or whatever. They actually have seen it being done. The second is that um, people should be told that what they're doing is wrong. Okay, they should be told what they're doing is wrong, and an ignorant person should be told, a person is not born a scholar. Indeed, we are ignorant in the matters of the Sharia until the scholars taught us. Maybe there are no scholars in your village. So they would tell them, maybe you don't know that this thing that you're doing is not allowed, which is totally possible. Um, and then they would be educated about it and they shouldn't be upset about it. Should say like, okay, yeah. It's funny because, there's baseline assumptions here that I feel like sometimes I might get in trouble for this, but like the baseline assumption should be that a Muslim wants to follow the rules of Islam. So if they're told like, hey, this thing that you're doing, it's not really allowed, and they're not done, obviously people rebel against things that are done in a way that's not appropriate, right? But if they're just told, hey, this thing, it's not really good what you're doing, maybe you should do something else, and they don't want to hear that, it's kind of a strange concept. In theory, in theory, it's a strange concept. Now, again, part of the problem is that a lot of people get involved in a lot of things that maybe they shouldn't get involved in, or they rebuke matters that they don't know anything about, or maybe there's a difference of opinion on, or maybe they don't really have a relationship with the person, so they don't understand what's happening, and so on. So but he's saying like they should be willing to hear it. And this does happen, even up to today, even though, well, maybe today I don't know. Sometimes, like when you go from very little information, then there's a sweet spot where you have very little information and then you get access to information, and there's a sweet spot of information where everything still is like sensible. And then there's an information overload point where you actually can't make sense out of anything anymore. You kind of have to like revert back to the beginning and be like, I don't know what to do anymore because there's so much information on every issue. I can't actually figure out what am I supposed to do. SubhanAllah. I feel like we're getting there again. Or we're getting to that point now. It's like actually, there's tons of people of knowledge, but it's difficult to figure out what to do. And there's a lot of people, maybe not people of knowledge, but usually if you talk to someone of knowledge, you can figure out what to do. But there's a lot of people talking, and that makes it harder to figure out what to do. The third stage, prohibition by admonition, advice, and telling the person to fear Allah. So basically, they would remind them. It should be done in a gentle manner, without force or anger. And people need these reminders. Um, huh. Dawood al-Ta'i was asked. Dawood al-Ta'i was one of the early righteous people. He's like, again, in every field you have your big names. So in the early period. Of course, the four imams, but there's also like the students of the four imams. There's other people who are in the realms of knowledge. You'll know these names. But I would have thought he's one of the people who, in the realm of like spirituality and stuff like that, you're gonna know his name comes up a lot. And he was from the people who attended the gathering of Imam Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Uh, and so he was a very righteous person. And he was asked, what do you think of a person who goes to the rulers and enjoins them to do good and prohibits them from evil? They go to the ruler, they tell the ruler what they should or shouldn't be doing. He said, I fear that he will be whipped. He was told he can bear that, meaning the individual that we're talking about, he can handle getting whipped. He said, then I fear that he will be killed by a sword. And then he was told he can handle that. That's not an issue either. He's he's ready to die. And he said he can bear that. Then he said, I fear for him the latent illness, which is self-conceit, al-ujb, al-ujb, right? So he's saying that, all of these scenarios have some issues in them, Maybe the person is going to get killed. That's the concern. Okay, if getting killed is not the concern, then what's the concern? Concern is ujb. Assalamu alaikum. كيفك عمو؟ طمنا عليكم. And then if that's not the concern, then the concern is ujb, that they're going to be self-conceited. They're happy about themselves. Okay. Ujb is very, very, very dangerous. Uh, and it's very subtle and it's very difficult to avoid. Actually, these people like Dawood al-Ta'i and the others, they would often say that the last thing that leaves the heart of the righteous people is hubb al-riyasa. The last thing that there's different kinds of diseases of the heart. They're much more, in some ways, like they're much more interesting than the base level Islam type stuff. Like salah, fasting, all of these things. It's pretty straightforward. You have the rule, you need to do it. Where things get more interesting is when you dig a little bit deeper. When you dig a little bit deeper, you get into issues like, even though these are individual obligations too, like to have some sort of understanding of ujb is an individual obligation. Ujb is basically like a person enjoys being seen, or they feel really good about themselves, than what the self-conceited, or they're impressed. And I think in English, like a good way to put it is that they're impressed with themselves. Like one of the signs of the later times is that uh, uh, إعجاب كل ذي أمر بأمره. That every person who has an opinion will be impressed with their opinion. You know, this is the narration of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Yeah, everyone will be impressed with their opinion. They're like, I have the. Of course, this doesn't mean that you can't have an opinion. Everyone has an opinion. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, I mean, they had opinions that were so strong that they ended up fighting each other over it. وَنُحْسِنَ الظَّنَّ بِالْجَمِيعِ. Think well of all of them, but they held their opinion. And so sometimes, it doesn't mean you can't have an opinion. Obviously, have an opinion. Just we hold every opinion with the understand, not every opinion that is allowed to have some variation on it. We hold it with the understanding that I could be wrong. It's basically the baseline of it is that I could be wrong. I think this is what's right, but I could be wrong. And any matter that's allowed to be differed on, then we should actually um, like we have to do this. We have to recognize like there could be another opinion here and I could be wrong. Only thing that you don't do that on is if there's ijma. If there's like absolute consensus on something, then we don't have a conversation on it. I just noticed Chris's hat is really cool. MashaAllah. So, uh, fourth stage. Fourth stage is scolding and rebuking with tough words. So now they move a little bit further. They give them a little bit stronger words. Did it softly, didn't stop breaking them. Didn't we cover this? No, we didn't cover that. He must be talking about it in two different ways. Okay, so basically the point here that he's getting at is that um, when trying to stop the evil, you take progressive steps. Just go to like the highest step, you know? It's a good parenting piece too. Like, don't play your highest card in the first move. You know? It's like something happens, you play your highest. It's like, okay, so now what are you going to do if that one didn't work? Like, you're kind of stuck, you know? And then you look foolish because now you don't have anything left and you know that you lost. There's a general rule in life. Also, don't play your highest card first. Actually, it's the opposite. Play the lowest card you possibly can in order to achieve the result. And then if you have to go a little bit higher, you go a little bit higher, go a little bit higher until you deal with the situation. And think about like, okay, where am I willing to take this? And what is it going to look like? Because you don't want to, end up like, okay, so what do I do now? Every parent has dealt with this, you know? You reach that moment, you're like, wait, even if you did it properly and you took one step and then the next step and the next step and the next step, everyone gets to the point where you're like, well, what do I do now? I don't have anything left that I can use that's halal. And I don't know. Like, I don't know what to do now. SubhanAllah. All right. Actually, next section. On the qualities of the person engaged in preventing infringements. This one I think is more relevant. So what are the qualities of the person who's stopping something that's not allowed? Number one is that they should have knowledge. Okay, I think it came up before. Number one is that they know what they're talking about. Number two is that they have wara. Um, yeah, I'm not really sure the wording of what's being said here, but they should have some level of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That they're not just like they know something is wrong and they're going to stop someone from doing it, but they don't have any like taqwa themselves, right? Number three is that they have good character. And that is essential because it enables a person to desist from committing evil. Because if a person's anger is aroused, then knowledge and fear of Allah alone will not be sufficient in suppressing it if the person is not endowed with good manners. Hmm. Okay, so number three is that they have good manners. Again, it's normal for a person if like someone comes to us and they're trying to tell us about something we should or should not be doing and they have bad manners about it, we're not really going to be so receptive. It's the natural way of things, you know. And they are, to be honest though, they're good opportunities for us to do tazkiyah internally, you know, because in the end of the day, it has to be about what's right and what's wrong. It has to be about Allah. So even if someone came and told us with bad manners, ideally, we can objectively look at that and be like, well, they didn't do that in a way that's appropriate, but they're right, and I should listen to it. Which is, of course, harder. It's harder to do. And that's an ideal we often hold others to, but we don't want to hold ourselves to. You know, like we'll have bad manners and we'll tell someone else something, and then we'll say, well, they should listen anyways, you know. But we don't do the same thing for ourselves, which is that someone did it to us. We should also make effort. One of the predecessors said, none should enjoin good except a person who is gentle in enjoining, gentle in prohibiting, patient in enjoining, patient in prohibiting, knowledgeable of what he is enjoining, and knowledgeable of what he is prohibiting. Other etiquettes include limiting links to people and giving up hope of benefiting from them. Okay, why? Because if you're connected to what you can get from people, you're going to be less likely to say something to them when they do something that's wrong that they need to be told about. Because you're seeking to benefit from them, you're seeking to, and again, this is part of the challenge of should I go on a tangent here that's going to be problematic? Probably. Inshallah. Saw an advertisement recently. I'm not trying to put on blast the institution, so I'm not going to mention the institution. I saw an advertisement recently about an institution that's hiring a youth director, which, you know, by the way, just for anyone who's thinking about going into this field and stuff, how can I say this politely? Imam positions are very fickle. What do you think youth director positions are going to be? Like if you need to do that and you want to do that, just know that you have no guarantee on this position and you should make your life decisions accordingly based on your age and your responsibilities and your, you know, career trajectory and all of these kind of things. Like youth director positions, I think are very reasonable for someone who lives in that locality. For someone to move and take on a youth director position, it's very scary to me, you know. Allah, nasallahu salama. Understand? Like, you know, boards change, people change. One board makes a decision, they're really excited, they're willing to put forth like a huge budget to hire a good youth director and so on and so forth. And the next board comes and they're like, well, this doesn't make sense in our budgeting. What does that happen to you? You lose your job. So it's just, you know, it's a very, on top of that, you see that the community, they put this advertisement out. It's a weekend of programming, and it says, come and hear from three different candidates for the youth director position. It's like a weekend of programming. You get to see and hear three different candidates for the youth director position. And I just like kind of cried inside, you know. Felt so bad. Like if you're that person, yeah, imagine like you're that person, you put some effort into your life to study dean and like assumingly if like it's a highly paid youth director position, assuming which it is, then assumingly the person's gonna have some knowledge. They might not be like a full-on sheikh, but they're probably like they've probably spent at least a couple years studying. I hope. I hope that's who they're looking to hire if they're paying them more than some places pay imams. But let's just assume that they're doing that. Um, and you spent a couple years studying, you've been around people of knowledge, you have some adab, you have some akhlaq, stuff like this. And then you come to a weekend of programming where other people are also competing for the same position in the public with the heart over the hearts and minds of young people. Doesn't it just feel like really like you're not setting the thing up in a way that's going to have good results. And then how dishonored does the person feel? You know? Like imagine you have an imam that's you're trying to hire for an imam and you have two khutbas. You bring one imam for the first khutbah and one imam for the second khutbah, and then you keep them for the whole weekend and you have like a picnic with both of them. And then you do an evening lecture with one and an evening lecture with the other one. And then like each one's supposed to what? Like outperform the other one. That's how you decide who's the right fit, who can like perform better in one lecture. It's a very strange, I don't know why I'm on this right now. Because in order to command what is good and forbid what is evil, you have to have less needs and desires and hopes in the people, right? So now you have a youth director. Take, for example, you have a youth director. They're going to come in and they're supposed to guide people, right? They're not supposed to just make them feel good and tell them whatever they want and like see who can be more likable. They're supposed to come and like give guidance and provide a source of guidance for the people and so on. So how are they going to do that if the whole thing is based on like whether or not the youth like them? I mean, which is, I'm not saying youth shouldn't like them, obviously, right? Like you don't bring someone in and they don't know how to deal with anyone and they're going to hurt people's feelings and like all this kind of stuff. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that like it's kind of like rate my professor, you know? It's like, so there might be some truth in it, but half the time, what is it basically going to boil down to? At least half the time is whose class was easier, they get the higher rating. Okay, is that the actual point of education? It's not the actual point of education, right? So, I mean, you're just setting up a system for failure. Anyways, limiting links to people and giving up hope of benefiting from them. Uh, it has been narrated that one of the righteous predecessors had a cat. Okay, look at this. This person had a cat, and every day he would get some meat from the butcher who was his neighbor. Okay, so the butcher is his neighbor. The butcher is, of course, going to have like leftover scraps of meat and stuff like that. And every day he would get some scraps of meat for his cat from his neighbor. Thereafter, he saw the butcher engaged in some evil deed. This butcher was doing something bad. So he put the cat out of his house and then he went to the butcher and prohibited him from the deed. And the butcher said, from today on, I'm not going to give you anything for the cat. You see the issue? Right? So he knew, but the righteous person, he knew this ahead of time, which is that if I'm going to tell this person that he shouldn't be doing this thing, I need to not have any needs from him, right? So he got rid of the cat first. Then he went and he told him, don't do this thing. And the guy told him, I'm not going to give you anything for your cat from now on. And then he said, I did not prohibit you except after I had taken the cat away from my house so that I will not need anything from you. Now, this is a very interesting story, right? Obviously, some people are going to like be sad for the cat and the guy and his cat and stuff like that. But it's a very interesting story. It raises like a lot of it just raises a lot of very interesting things, you know. Like how what happens to a community when they feel like the imam needs them. Are they able to take their islah? Are they not? Are they able to take their guidance? Are they not able to take their guidance? This is, of course, much more of an issue for like really big donors. If someone's giving like $50 a month, $100 a month or something, it's not probably they're not feeling like this, issue in the same way. But if someone's giving like, I mean, even $1,000 a month is not that big of a deal, honestly. Like if you're very wealthy, I hate to like say this in such a for people who make like I don't know several $100,000 a month, it's not really that big of a deal. Let alone people who make in the millions and stuff. But if you give like a large amount of money, it's going to be harder for you to hear something from the person. It's just the reality of it, you know? So that's why these systems weren't built on that. They weren't built on that. Uh, Allah help us. This is correct because if a person relies on people for two things, he will not be able to prohibit them from evil. And these things are first, because of the things which they provide him with, he is unable to fulfill this noble act. Second, he fails to do this due to pleasing them and being praised by them. So basically, if they're relying on people, then these two things they get in the way. Give me 1 second. Need to make a note to someone on something related to this. Hmm, where can I send it? Send it to them directly. Okay. Alhamdulillah. This is part of the reason people thought it was funny at the fundraiser last year for the Majlis. When it came time to do the fundraising, I left. I went outside, you know. And just, especially for me, like I'm the main employee at the Majlis. So everyone else is a little bit different. Someone's not employed in the same way. Sheikh Fuad is not employed in the same way. No one's employed at the Majlis the way I am. So like it gets really awkward, you know. So when they did the fundraising, I just left. I went inside. It's actually really nice because some of the core volunteers, they're not involved in it either. It's fundraising time. They're not involved in it. They did their part for the evening. They did their welcoming, they did their setup. So we had like a nice little session outside while the fundraising was going on. And we came back in. It's great. Nasallahu salama. Allah protect us. It's all fitan. And it is compulsory to be gentle and enjoining good and forbidding evil, as Allah said, فَقُولُوا لَهُ قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا, and speak to him with a gentle speech. A narration states that Abu Darda radiallahu ta'ala anhu passed by a man who had committed a sin and was being scolded by the people. He said, "What if you had found him in a well? Would you have taken him out?" They said, "Yes, we would have taken him out." He said, "Therefore do not scold your brother, and praise Allah who has saved you from from what the perpetrator did." They said, "Do you not hate him?" He said, "I hate his actions, and if he leaves them, he is my brother." This is Abu Darda. Abu Darda, of course, is a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So this is very early. Saying he saw people scolding someone else for doing something bad. He said, "If he was in a well, would you take him out?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Then what are you doing? You're keeping him in the well. He made a mistake. Just like beat him up while he's down there. Help him to get out." A boy was passing through a road dragging his garment behind him. The companions of Silah ibn Sila ibn Ushaym wanted to rebuke him severely. He said, "Let me suffice for you in his issue." Then he said, "O my brother's son, I need something from you." The boy said, "What is it?" He said, "I want you to lift your garment." He said, "Yes, I will please you by obeying you." He then lifted his garment, and Sila told his companions, "This is better than what you wanted to do, because if you had scolded him and offended him, he would have also insulted you." It's very simple, right? And he says, "Young, what is the point?" The point is that there's a widely held position in Islamic law, the ones that a male's garments shouldn't go behind their ankles, below their ankle. Okay, it's not the only position, but let's just go with the as if it's the only position right now for the sake of the story. So they saw this happening and they wanted to rebuke him. And they wanted to be like really harsh about it. It's very relevant actually to American Islam because this was something that was very, very harshly rebuked for a long time. And so they wanted to do that. And he went to him, he said, I'll take care. Don't worry, I'm going to take care of you guys. He went to him and said, listen, ya bunayya. He spoke to him very nicely. I need your help with something. He said, what is it? He said, I need you to lift your clothes up a little bit. He said, of course, I'm going to do it then. So he understood like the relationships and everything else that are involved. Um, it looks like something's missing from the sentence that's coming, but I'll say it. Al-Hasan was invited to a wedding. A container made of silver which had sweets made from dates and fat was brought to him. He took the sweets and put them on a loaf of bread and then ate them from there. I guess it says and then from there. A person said this is silent prohibition of an evil deed. So what is happening here? In case people don't know, not allowed to eat out of gold and silver. Not allowed to use utensils of gold and silver, like actual gold and silver. Plated or not plated, there's some conversation, but also really we should just avoid these things. So he's at a wedding and the desserts come on a platter that's silver. And he knows I can't eat from this. Like it would be haram for him to take this food from that platter and eat it. So what does he do? He gets a piece of bread, puts all of the stuff on the piece of bread, and then he distributes it from there or he eats it from there. So he changed the situation, but he did it without making like a scene out of it. Okay? It's a very interesting story too, actually. The way that it's happening is very subtle, right? All right. Next chapter on reprehensible actions which people are accustomed to, and enjoining rulers to do good and forbidding them from evil. Oh, that's my favorite section. Such an interesting section. We're not going to get to it. Khair, alhamdulillah. We're actually getting close to the end of this book. We're on page 130 almost now, of 160. So we might actually finish the second volume. Alhamdulillah. We finished the first volume, now we're getting close to the second volume. Third and fourth volumes are very practical. So on good character and bad characters and the qualities of the heart, very, very interesting and good volumes. I think they might be a little bit shorter too, we'll see. Okay, on reprehensible actions, there's reprehensible actions people are accustomed to. Many of them are done, but I'm just going to point out some of them, he says. Some of them that are related to masajid to begin with. One of them is not observing tranquility in ruku' and sujood and with all the positions of salah. Or turning away from the qibla, having impurities on one's clothes, all of these kind of things are things that happen in the masajid that people should be aware of. So basically now he's getting into this like when people are praying, when you're standing in a position, you should stand long enough in the statement of the Prophet ﷺ that the bones settle. And you go to ruku', you stay until the bones settle. And you come up and you stay. Tuma'nina, this is called tuma'nina in salah. At each position you stay long enough that you're kind of settled in it. And then you move to the next one. Not you're going like super fast, you know? Clothes not being clean. Another one would be very relevant today is like the aura not being covered. And this is, you know, uh, regardless of whether or not a person normally covers their aura, which is obviously an issue. But in salah, we should be particular about it. I think it's a good like tradition, for example, in a lot of Muslim majority places, you'll see this tradition where like women have prayer outfits. And oftentimes they'll have these prayer outfits, even if they wear like hijab or something like that, but maybe their hijab is not really like totally full technically. So they'll put this on for salat. It's a nice thing. Maybe they wear pants or something like that, and the pants are not so wide. Then it's like good to have something nice for salat. Guys are the same way. Like if you're not, maybe your shirt is not really like so great in the way that it covers your body, or your pants are not really so great in the way that it covers your midsection or something like this. And it's really nice to have something that's a little bit longer. You can put it on for salat. Even it could be very, very light. Beer Necessities. It's an interesting company name. Beer Necessities has this jubba. They call it a jubba. I think they have two of them. You want the one that's like a very light material. It's extremely light. Like you can fold it up and you could probably fit it in your hand pretty easily because it's very, very light. But you can put it on and it's like a 3/4 length over thing. Could put it on, be really nice and salat, if you're not, then you don't have to worry about your backside showing, for guys, it seems to be very common now. If you notice, by the way, since I'm a guy, I don't really like to put too much emphasis on the women's side, but of course, the women should cover it as well, but I'll let you guys figure that out. But if you notice, like traditionally Muslim men's clothing was also long. It wasn't only women's clothing. Traditional men's Muslim clothing. You go think about anywhere that's historically Muslim, men's shirts will always be long. The tops will always be long because you don't want to have to be worried about that when you're making salat. So this is very common now too. Avoiding mistakes in recitation. Um, you know, uh, things like another common one, even though it's not exactly what he's mentioning here, is to make the iqamah into an adhan. The adhan is supposed to be elongated, the iqamah is supposed to be quick. Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, or depending on the method, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. It's not like a second adhan, Sometimes when people's voices are very beautiful, they make a second adhan. Make one adhan, one iqamah. Uh, Others include, look at these examples he gives. It's interesting. Like others include wearing silk clothes by the sermon giver, the khatib. Men obviously don't wear silk unless they have some sort of skin issue. But normal situation, men don't wear silk in Sharia. So they shouldn't be wearing silk. Um, or holding a golden sword in his hands. This could actually happen because they put different like hilt on the sword. Maybe someone put like a golden thing on the sword and you didn't think about it, and next thing you know, you're standing in the khutbah holding a sword. Does this sound funny to you guys? 2 out of 4 madhabs, you hold something. The khatib holds something in the khutbah. Now, they should have like a stick or a sword or a staff or a spear or something like this. They hold that while they're standing on the minbar giving the khutbah. So, you know, meaning you hold it, meaning it's sunnah, not that it's required in 2 out of 4. So maybe what they're holding is impermissible. Other reprehensible actions include what the storytellers do in the masjids, like lying, and prohibited things like talking about things which cause civil strife and so on. Um, I'm going to read what he says here because we should consider it. More include free intermingling of men and women. People should be prohibited from that. It's a big conversation, obviously. What is ikhtilat? What is it not? What are the limits of it? It is a big question in the Sharia. Um, Sometimes people see the way that we do things here and they think like we don't believe in any barriers between men and women or something. We do, but just prefer invisible ones that are enacted by the people who are upholding them rather than physical ones. But every situation is different, every place is different. We believe that this is how a good way for things to work and how that we are, but it's good to remind ourselves. The basic rule of the Sharia is that men and women don't really interact with each other if they're not married and they don't have a reason to. Question becomes, what is a reason? That's where all of the conversation happens, is what is a reason? What is a valid reason for interaction? What is not, and so on and so forth. And you could take like a stricter or less strict approach on that, and a lot of it is cultural. Even some of our shuyukh, they said that one of them, he said, I grew up in an area where you could literally go 2 weeks and never see a woman. That's what I grew up in. But we'll see him in context where that are kind of similar to this one, you know? And he's like, but that's not where I'm living now. Like I grew up in that, and that's what I was accustomed to, and that's my default. But I recognize that people have different circumstances and so on. And it's as long as no like clear outward rule is being broken, then it's not being broken. But we should have adab. It's very important to have adab, have good character, be appropriate. In the end, we want to be appropriate and not be dysfunctional and not like overdo things. Be kind of natural, be appropriate, do what you need to do, and you move on with it. And I think the reality of this is that people kind of know when things are bordering on inappropriateness. And then we have to have that inside of ourselves to be able to. The reality of the world is today, by the way, that no matter how much you try to force that, it's not forcible because there's a million ways to get around those walls. Teaching in schools, we've seen it over and over again. There'll always be some way to get around it. So really, we have to instill this inside of ourselves. Uh, so basically, he mentions other things, but they're not all really so accurate to what's going on with us. I would say another reprehensible thing in the masjid or in religious spaces, yeah, do it, don't do it, is turning acts of worship into like political services. Okay, so, you know, I'm trying not to, I'm not trying to be judgmental. And I understand. I don't know what happens. First disclaimer, I don't know what happens in San Diego anymore. I haven't been to a major San Diego Eid in a long time. So just to be clear, I'm not commenting on anything that's happening here. And I understand why people like to do this whole thing where they bring politicians to Eid prayer and let them give a khutbah. But to me, this is reprehensible. Eid khutbah does not need to be turned into a political theater. Uh, Also related to this is that administration of the masjid should not be giving their own khutbah. I was, I came to know of a situation recently on Eid where it's like a politician came, they gave their khutbah. The admin of the masjid came, gave his khutbah. Then time for the actual salat came. The salat happens, and then the khatib gave the khutbah. So if you're the khatib, what do you feel at that point? You feel like I'm just here to fulfill your obligations so that you can do your fundraising. It's not really like there's not a concern for the actual worship of this, right? And Allah musta'an. But I think this is reprehensible personally. I don't think we need to make aid into this. I understand why people do it. You have all these Muslims, you want to have political power and influence and so on and so forth. It's the easiest way to it's the easiest way to do that, but it's not always that we have to do things the easiest way. Sometimes you do something a little bit harder way in order to preserve the sanctity of yourself and your religion and your acts of worship and so on. This is my personal opinion. Not, other people can have their opinions. Uh, I feel the same way about fundraising and Taraweeh, so shoot the messenger, I understand, and I even get I understand the impetus, I understand even the reasoning. Reasoning being that we need to fund these things and so on and so forth. I get it. But like Sometimes I've heard stories where like people, it's like 45-minute break in Tarawih in order to do fundraising. It's crazy. So hmm. Should I have opened that one or not? I don't know. Reprehensible actions in the markets. Hmm. These are all really interesting ones because at the same time that you learn fiqh and tazkiyah, you also learn about society, right? Like what kind of societies were these people living in? What kind of things were happening, right? This one's not as interesting because the stuff that happens in marketplaces is basically all the same. People lie about their goods, they deceive people, it's all the same kind of stuff. But there's other ones that come later in terms of like reprehensible actions that happen in the street, reprehensible actions that happen in the bathhouses, because that's how people used to clean themselves, right? They go to a bathhouse. They didn't have baths in their home. They go to a bath. So all of those will come, inshallah, but we'll stop here. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. All right, any questions or anything? People have comments? Yes, sir.
You mentioned that not the very end, but in the middle, there was a lot of things about advice and how to give advice. And you mentioned in there that it's for people that are, it's an assumption that people want to hear advice, want to follow advice. I guess the challenge that I in understanding how we perceive this is we live in either a society or an era that raises rebellion,
Mm-hmm.
individuality,
Mm-hmm.
and it's everything from like
Everything.
child level to rebelling against biology, adult level these days. So it's like it's ingrained in like the fabric of
100%.
everyday thought.
Yep.
And I feel like a lot of times, at least in conversations I've had, people, even people my age, they miss a lot of times just like even just on basic things in purpose, right? Just a couple, uh, like fundamentally, it's like optimizing for either individual happiness, freedom, or optimizing for wealth. It's never about like that, but on most metrics, like for way more successful.
MashaAllah.
But it's not framed that way. So how do we even fix the underlying framing? Because I feel like the model thing on when that framing isn't there, it's very neuter, it's very targeted.
Yes, subhanAllah. It's a very interesting point. Yeah. So we have this reality of like extreme individualism that basically pervades everything in society, not only for children, like basically every Disney movie is about some child who has raging individualism that's going against the authority of everyone else. Sometimes, by the way, that could be somewhat reasonable. Sometimes it could be unreasonable. Just to be like there is a little bit of that that's necessary. Of like I'm willing to stand up against what's wrong if I have to. Um, like Encanto comes to mind. You know, has that same thread. Sometimes it's very mixed though. Things become very mixed. Anyways, and then with adults it's the same. You know, just this we want to be individuals. We want to be, and that dominates everything. And then our life choices are basically oftentimes optimized for that, optimized for individual pleasure, optimized for individual wealth accumulation or whatever else it might be, but not necessarily optimized for ibadah or worship or any number of other things. Which, I think about this one too because there's decisions that are can be made that have really far-reaching consequences. Like, why did I choose this decision? Did I choose it because it was going to pay more, or did I choose it because of some other indicator, like being able to live in a community that's strong, or being able to live close to a masjid, for example, or being able to live in a place where it's not strange to be a Muslim versus a place where it is strange to be a Muslim. Like there's a lot of considerations that a person could make, um, and they affect our daily lives in like really profound ways. And so the question is, how do we kind of like resist that?
Yeah, kind of like because I'm the model now, because I'm like, a
Yeah.
lot of these other things are built on that foundation.
It's assuming that people are making decisions on that foundation, right?
Like this era of humanity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, technically, it's not conditioned upon that. Um, Even if a person doesn't want to, like the assumption is that a person wants to hear, right? But even if they don't want to hear it, the obligation is still there at some level, which is a question of how do we deliver it. So I don't know. I mean, I think we just continue to make dawah, continue to educate, continue to call people to what's right, continue to encourage them to live good lives. Um, I think that it's really important to read and study and hear about the lives of righteous people. It's extremely important, because when you see like the way that these people made decisions, the way that they thought about things, the choices that they made, it really affects us in a different way. Like theory is one thing, we're hearing about all this stuff, it's interesting. But when you have the stories of the righteous people, you're like, wow, that's different. And the more kind of steeped a person is in that, the better. Um, so, inshallah, may Allah help us. I don't really have anything more to say on that, but may Allah help us. You're right. There's like a bedrock that you're calling to what's good, but you didn't change the thing that's underneath. That's
Conversation happening at this level, but
yeah. But the problem is at that level. Yeah.
any debate, these debates.
Right. Right. So you change your conversation to that level. Sometimes, you may look at a situation and be like, I should stop. This person really shouldn't be doing this thing. And I could tell them they shouldn't be doing this thing. But I know that their issue is actually much deeper. So I'm going to talk to them about that other thing instead and try to address the deeper issue instead. And I think that that can be also like part of the strategy, especially practically in like a Dawah sense. Yeah, it's part of the strategy to think about it in that way. Again, I could talk to them about this right now, but that's probably not going to do a whole lot. Start where I need to start. So, okay. Anyone else? Yes. Which one? Yeah.
Would it still apply to the not hand?
Hmm.
And the example I'm thinking of in my mind is practically, for example, within a household, you could have many people in each generation. And sometimes you have people with mental illness. And it's not a mental illness like you need to be institutionalized for, but it's something that comes and goes. And it can cause harm to people in the household, and it can cause harm to people coming into the household because there's other people living there.
Yeah.
So how do you within that household, not people stalking those people, but how do you within those households manage that harm that's being done?
That's a really good question. So when we talk about these levels of dealing with harms, I think one of the big takeaways of this is to understand that the way that they thought about this whole conversation is very logical in the sense of like there's different levels of harms and there's different levels of responses to harms. And essentially, like what the major takeaway of all of that is that one's response should be commensurate with the issue, right? And so I guess when you talk about this question, which is of course a very it can be very complicated inside of households, different generations, different ages, mental health issues. Some of them come, some of them go, sometimes more present, less present. People might be harmed by them, so on and so forth. Like really, it's going to come down to a question of how do we balance the various considerations we have and come to a conclusion that's going to lead to the most benefit and the least harm. And it's really hard to say a lot more than that because like the kinds of possible situations are so many. Like adults are not the same as children, for example. Like an adult might tolerate certain harm because they're an adult. And they might look at it like, okay, my parent is elderly and maybe they were never really very nice, but now they're elderly and they're really not very nice. And I just kind of, but I know the situation and I'm old and I don't like it and it makes me really sad, but I can handle it. And you deal with it because, you hope that it'll be your ticket to Jannah, for example. But then maybe you introduce like a child into the situation, it becomes very different because what I can handle, maybe my child can't handle, or someone else's child, or something like that. And will have now lasting consequences. So now, like, there's a harm. It's the same harm in a sense, but it's being applied because it's now affecting different people. The response has to change. But I guess part of what I think is here is that it's okay to think reasonably about these kinds of issues and make kind of like an assessment of the situation and say, you know what, it's not because I don't care about X, Y, Z. It's not because I don't understand even why X is this way. I understand why X is this way. They had all these things that happened in their life. It was never resolved. They have this issue now. They're just really, I don't like to use popular terms because I feel like they kind of distract us sometimes, but it's a really toxic situation. And um, I get it. And as much as I want to have mercy on them and like be patient with them and stuff, I can't put why around them because why it's going to cause more problems. And so these situations are very tough. Yeah. And you don't have to, I don't think it's saying that like you have to start at level one response, then level two response, then level three response, like a madman's beating a dog. You have to start by reminding him gently. No, you know that that's not probably going to work. You have to You're going to take whatever step is necessary in order to stop the situation. Um, so yeah, it's probably as much as can be said. Family stuff gets very complicated.
It's not even like the acute situation, but the long-term situation. Yeah, you can take the animal away from that person at that time, but like long-term, what do you do with it? Right?
Yeah. Long term, you have someone around, you have a community. It was not interesting. America is challenging because like everything is so isolated. And people kind of are not always realistic in their analysis of the world. Like they're very idealistic. They want everything to be a particular way. They're not willing to accept that it's just not going to be that way. In any community of people, you're going to have all kinds of factors and all kinds of characters. And the goal is to not like cancel these characters out of existence and make them be homeless on the street by themselves. The goal is to have a society that manages to deal with these things somehow. Um, One of the things that we used to see in Egypt that was really interesting was like it was not so uncommon. You would see kids that had like maybe Down syndrome or something, and you would always see them in the local masjid. And it was like, and you could tell that because it's not like here, right, where you have one masjid. Like where we lived in Cairo, I could walk in less than 5 minutes to at least probably like 10 masjids. I'm not doing the math. Like I'm not looking at the map in my head right now, but probably realistically 10 masjids I could get to in less than 5 minutes walking. So you go to the one that's literally closest to your home, usually, right? That would be your default. And so all of the people who are going to that masjid, they kind of know each other. So you could tell and I would go around to different places because you want to see different things, right? But when you come into certain masjids and you'd see, like, you can tell that this kid is a local kid and everyone knows him. So he'll come in and he might like grab a mushaf and do something that's kind of unexpected, or he might do this, or he might yell in the middle of salat or something like that. And everyone knows the situation. Everyone deals with it, right? And you would see the same thing with like different characters. I told this story before when we were on a flight domestically. I should wrap up, but domestic flight inside Egypt. Because when you're international is different, but when you're domestic, you're dealing with internal people, right? So we were a domestic flight from Cairo to like southern Egypt somewhere. And somehow this flight, everyone gets on board. It's almost entirely Egyptian, and we get stuck on this runway, you know, which is not moving. We just sit there for like forever, half an hour, hours passing. We're on this runway, like how those situations go. They don't give you any updates, even though they could, and you're just sitting there. And you could tell like people are getting a little bit agitated. But if you know Egypt, like you know all of the characters. I don't know how to explain it. Like when you know a society, you know all of the characters in that society, right? So as things are like starting, the temperature's beginning to rise, you see that like all the characters start to come out. And all of the people who have some sense, they know how to deal with the various characters. So there's like the guy that starts getting angry and like he's going to start cursing. You know he's one of them. Then there's the other person that's going to like do this, and there's the other person that's going to do this, and then, but everyone knows how to handle the situation. And I think that's part of like the long-term thing is that I want to come to a community, for example, where I can have, let's say, a father who's elderly and is going to say completely insane things that are like totally racist and haram and whatever. I'm not saying this about my own dad. I'm just saying theoretically, like this happens, right? And I want to have a community where I can bring him into that space and everyone's going to understand, like, yeah, he's really saying things that are totally out of pocket. And that's so and so's dad. And we're just going to kind of like dance around the situation a little bit and kind of deal with it because it's not going to change. Like the guy's 80 years old, it's probably not going to change. Talking sense to him is probably not going to work. And sometimes that's a situation. But how do we handle it? You know? So things were escalating on that plane fight. I've told this story before, but it was funny. It was such a scene. Things are escalating on the plane fight, and then finally the pilot comes on and like says what's going on. And in English he spoke fine, but in Arabic he just couldn't get it out. Every second word was he's like wa ihna and like everyone's like trying to figure out what this guy's saying. And then someone just yells out there like Salli ala nabi hatigi. He's like he's like make salah on the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it'll come. It's like such a beauty. Like imagine this culture, subhanAllah, that someone knows that's the response to that situation. A whole plane started laughing, you know? Like, Salih an Nabi Atiki. Everyone just dies out of laughter and like the whole situation's diffused. But it's like you have all of these characters, all of these things, someone knows exactly. Like I say this thing, it's gonna fix the situation. Everyone just started laughing and like then everyone was friends and took another half an hour and we get off the flight and hang out in the terminal together and it's like totally different. SubhanAllah, like culture is a very interesting thing. Uh, all right, maybe one more, inshallah. Yes.
How restrictive is the Sharia around like clothing? I guess in particular around like clothing for Salah. And then how does culture have any effect on that? And also, I guess like the shape of the body, like if it's a skinny person versus someone who's overweight or something.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, good question. How strict is the Sharia on clothing and salah, and is that affected by culture, and is it affected by like basically body type or structure or whatever? Uh, so the base of it in terms of the aura, parts of the body that have to be covered in the Sharia, they have to be covered. That doesn't change by culture or by time or place or anything like that. What exactly that is might change. So you might have, for example, like, can the woman's feet be uncovered or not? There's a difference of opinion on that. So that's the first level. Second level then is if something from what should be covered becomes uncovered, what is the consequence of that? That's one of the big issues is like, at what point, for example, does it invalidate the salah? And some of the madhabs are more strict than others. Hanafi madhab, for example, is generally pretty lenient on this in terms of like how much can be, let's but I don't want to get into the fiqh of it right now, but like basically the point is what should be covered, what amount of that can be uncovered for how long before it, for example, invalidates the salah is a question that differs from madhab to madhab. Uh, In terms of body shape and stuff like this, the general rule would be definitely that the clothes is not see-through. That would be that one everyone agrees upon. And then ideally, it's not, they would say like it doesn't reveal the shape of what's beneath it. Now, that obviously, as you can imagine, is going to have a lot of conversation on it. What does that mean? What does it not mean? What does it mean for people that have body type X versus people who have body type Y? Like someone who's like really, really skinny, it's much easier question, right? Someone who's a little bit more full has different has different questions related to it. Um, but of course, there's a level of that which is kind of like within reason, and there's a level of it which is very difficult to do much about. Um, and so those will be looked at differently. Um, but yeah. And technically speaking, the rules inside of Salat and outside of Salat are not different. The difference is really just, does your Salat become invalid or not? But what's supposed to be covered? Actually, the whole conversation on what has to be covered and what doesn't have to be covered happens in the section on Salat, because that's where the practical consequence of it is in the act of worship. But it's true for outside of Salat as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, if there's something that we could generally say about like Muslim societies and cultures and stuff, is that generally their clothes were loose and long. And that was true basically everywhere. And if you look at kind of like traditional Muslim clothes, you'll see that. So essentially it was loose and it was long. How you do that in a particular place will of course vary based on culture. That will definitely and you can see that very clearly up to today. Look at Southeast Asia, look at South Asia, look at Central Asia, look at West Africa, East Africa, North Africa, all of these places, they look very different. And at the same time, there'll be some similarity. You know, like traditional Malaysian clothes for men is not so different from like a shalwar kameez. It's like cut differently, but in the end, it's pretty much the same. Also, you would notice that men wore turbans pretty much across cultures, except for like West Africa, like West Africa, Northwest Africa. Sometimes they do still, but like Andalus also like head coverings were a little bit different for men. But generally, like people covered their heads. It's not necessarily a requirement. I'm not saying it's a requirement, but people did it. Just talking about like what they used to do. Um, you know, eh, you could argue, sometimes people argue that the Sharia is, to not be different in clothing than the people that you live around. And it's like half true, but half false at the same time. Like the Prophet ﷺ did dress the way that his people dressed. And at the same time, especially towards the end of the message, he started to tell them like they should do certain things that would make them look different than others. So it's kind of like both, you know. You'll generally look similar to people who live in the place that you live, but there's usually also something that kind of like clearly distinguishes the person, whether it's like facial hair or clothing style or a hijab or like, it can look different ways, but the idea would be like you're the same, but you're not. And that's kind of like you're the same enough that there's something that people can relate to and they can latch onto, but at the same time, you're different enough that you're actually different. Because, I mean, we are different. It's part of having prophetic guidance is that we are different. So Allah Mustaan. Allah help us figure that out. Clothing is a really interesting question to me. It's a really interesting one. And of course, depending on like, also we live in America. America is extremely diverse. Like depending on your culture, your ethnicity, your ethnic heritage, or any number of different things, you might choose to do something different. That's okay. Like we don't have to have one answer to the clothing question for Islam in America. Yes.
Um, outside of the rules of the Sharia, how much of the differences that were prescribed by the law and dress is like to differentiate like some community socially within society or a state where they didn't have centralized identification systems.
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Community, how much of it is instruction by the Sharia?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I don't know that I have a good answer to that. You know, how much of the differentiating of the Prophet ﷺ in terms of dress and things like this was a matter of essentially governance, um, versus like in a matter of identity. Because you're in a pre-modern state where you don't have, I mean, the reality is that the Sharia has certain rules for Muslims that maybe don't apply to non-Muslims, right? So there was a reason why you would need a distinction in appearance. Like you might see something from someone, and if they're a Muslim, it needs to be stopped. And if they're not a Muslim, it doesn't have to be stopped. So you need to be able to tell kind of very clearly who's who. Um, so was that what's happening, or was it something else? Was it governance, or was it identity? Those are interesting questions.
Also, so how the Ahlul Bayt used to dress, you know, period, distinguishing
Hmm.
the people in straight away.
This is Ahlul Bayt. Don't give them your zakat. It's really interesting. I didn't know that actually. So in Ottoman societies, Ahlul Bayt used to dress in a certain way.
Or they would have a mark, like a badge or specific color. Or something that was.
Interesting.
distinct.
SubhanAllah. Interesting.
Had the same thing with like.
The ulama, of course, yeah.
Is like what the average person would wear,
Yeah,
but then you have like turban around
Yeah.
it to distinguish.
yeah. Like the Azhar style. You have the tarbush and then you have the imama around the tarbush. And it kind of indicates to people that this is someone you can ask your questions to, basically. Like they know that. In Egypt, you know that. Someone's wearing a certain thing, you know, okay, I can go. And it would happen. If you're like a student and I wouldn't do it in Egypt because I was like scared, you know. And they have other ulama that can they can deal with their ulama. They don't need me. Because if you wear the Azhar clothes, you will 100% get asked for fatwa. Like you'll get in a car, you get in a cab, the cab driver will ask you. They'll look at you, they say, Ya Sheikh. You know, I won't say it because there's like kids around, but like, you know, there's questions that come up for a taxi driver, for example, who's driving around all day long. You know, they have needs. Where do they go? You know, this happened, like someone we know, he wore it and then he got asked about using the restroom in different places and stuff like that. And you know, people ask you questions. This happened with my wife. Is she divorced? You know, you're like, okay, I was just trying to go to class. I didn't know how to deal with this right now. You know? So, but people knew that. Yeah. So the dress had like a consequence. So like sometimes people will see the Azhari jubba every now and then I'll wear it, or even if I wear the imam or something, they're like, where can I get that? I'm like, you can't get that. You can get that by going to Egypt and sitting in a classroom and getting made fun of for 7 years. Then you can wear it, you know? So but it has consequence. So I don't know. I mean, I think that it's probably somehow both. Like there's probably a piece of it that's governance, but I think that the identity piece is also real. Because the Prophet ﷺ started saying it in like really interesting things. Part your hair in this way and not in that way. Grow this part of your beard and not your mustache. And all of them were so you can be different than Ahlul Kitab. So you can be different than the people of the book. And like they're really interesting things that he's talking about, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Allahu Alam, it's a really good question for research. That'd be a great PhD. I wonder if anyone's done it. That'd be a great PhD research.